It won't come from abroad. It'll come from within, said Lincoln. And in that same speech, Lincoln passionately deplored mob violence. This was right after the murder of Elijah Lovejoy, the abolitionist newspaper editor. And Lincoln deplored mob violence, and he deplored mob rule, and he said it would lead to tyranny and despotism in America. That was the speech I gave that day after the House very graciously and warmly welcomed me back. And Tabitha and Hank came with me to the floor, and they watched it from the gallery. And when it was over, they went back to that office, Steny office, off of the House floor. They didn't know that the House had been breached yet, and that an insurrection, a riot, or a coup had come to Congress. And by the time we learned about it, about what was going on, it was too late. I couldn't get out there to be with them in that office. And all around me, people were calling their wives and their husbands, their loved ones, to say goodbye. Members of Congress, in the House anyway, were removing their congressional pins so they wouldn't be identified by the mob as they tried to escape the violence. Our new chaplain got up and said a prayer for us, and we were told to put our gas masks on. And then there was a sound I will never forget, the sound of pounding on the door like a battering ram. The most haunting sound I ever heard, and I will never forget it. My chief of staff, Julie Tagan, was with Tabitha and Hank locked and barricaded in that office. The kids hiding under the desk, placing what they thought were their final texts and whispered phone calls to say their goodbyes. They thought they were going to die. My son-in-law had never even been to the Capitol before. And when they were finally rescued, over an hour later by Capitol officers, and we were together, I hugged them and I apologized, and I told my daughter Tabitha, who's 24 and a brilliant algebra teacher in Teach for America. Now, I told her how sorry I was, and I promised her that it would not be like this again the next time she came back to the Capitol with me. And you know what she said? She said, "Dad, I don't want to come back to the Capitol." Of all the terrible, brutal things I saw and I heard on that day, and since then, that one hit me the hardest. That and watching someone use an American flagpole, with the flag still on it, to spear and pummel one of our police officers ruthlessly, mercilessly, tortured by a pole with a flag on it that he was defending with his very life. People died that day. Officers ended up with head damage and brain damage. People's eyes were gouged. An officer had a heart attack. An officer lost 3 fingers that day. 2 officers have taken their own lives. Senators, this cannot be our future. This cannot be the future of America. We cannot have presidents inciting and mobilizing mob violence against our government and our institutions because they refuse to accept the will of the people under the Constitution of the United States. Much less can we create a new January exception in our precious, beloved Constitution that prior generations have died for and fought for, so that corrupt presidents have several weeks to get away with whatever it is they want to do. History does not support a January exception in any way, So why would we invent one for the future? We close, Mr. President, and reserve your time.
I ask unanimous consent. I ask unanimous consent. There now be a 10-minute break. I ask unanimous consent the Senate recess for 10 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered.
With that gavel, we are now in a break, and you are watching a Washington Post special report. I'm Libby Casey. Well, while the debate today is about the U.S. Constitution, a document that I should add is the world's longest surviving charter of government, the techniques on display today were modern as Democrats used Twitter, Parler, and cell phone video to make their case. Let's go to my guests today, including James Hohmann. James, just a really emotional final message from Congressman Jamie Raskin there, the lead impeachment manager. We'll certainly talk about that in the next little while. But I want to turn our mind to the Constitution, which was, written in 1787, ratified a year later, and it's been in operation since 1789. Do you think the framers ever thought that their words would be juxtaposed with live video of a mob and the tweets of a sitting president?
Absolutely, they could never have imagined that, Libby. But they did leave us a document that is a living constitution in the sense that it applies, it works. It has survived because it was written with enough flexibility to be able to apply to a situation like what has played out here. And the issue today is this kind of what Jamie Raskin was calling a January loophole, a January exemption, where essentially the president's lawyers are arguing he shouldn't be able to get convicted for something that happened in his final weeks in office. But the founders clearly did envision that there would be leaders who would behave the way Trump did. There was a good line during Congressman Raskin's first speech where he said, Donald Trump may not have known very much about the founders, but the founders knew a whole lot about Donald Trump. And what he meant by that was that, the kinds of politicians that Congressman Joe Negussi from Colorado was talking about, the precedents that the senators just heard about, the founders did anticipate those. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And the founders at the Constitutional Convention had studied English common law and the British experience, and they thought about some of those impeachment cases as they drafted the impeachment language and created the standard for high crimes and misdemeanors. And obviously, we heard about William Belknap, and there are all these precedents, and so it is really amazing that whether the law, if the Constitution is being applied to someone who's trying to conspire with the British to get rid of Florida, or to deal with something that was captured on social media platforms even 5 years ago we couldn't have imagined. The Constitution still works.
Rhonda Colvin, joining us live from Capitol Hill. Jamie Raskin, Congressman Raskin, did not use hyperbole. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. He stuck to his message. He stuck to his goal, his argument here about the constitutionality of this. But yet there was this incredibly emotional moment at the end as he was talking about his family. And you could see that the experience hit home with him. As you know, it hit home with many of the men and women in that room today.
Right, and I think what was on display really is Congressman Raskin's personality. He is someone that is well-liked here on the Hill. So he's coming from a direction of trying to make this personal to his colleagues. And that's something I also noticed in this first part of today's proceedings, is that they are really laying out the case that this happened to us. You're hearing that we were attacked, that this happened to you. You were here in the chamber. So they're really trying to lay out to the senators that this is personal and we don't want this to happen again. That's something that I saw as a recurring theme among the impeachment managers, making this more of a collegial experience to tell the senators that this is something that happened to their body as well as over in the House and the Capitol overall. So I think that that is something that is quite different from the first impeachment proceedings of Donald Trump last year. That was a highly partisan event. And I think this time around, because The senators are right there in the chamber where these events took place. They all hid. They all have all the same experiences of that day. The impeachment managers are really trying to drive that point home, that they want to be in this together and hold these people accountable, hold Trump accountable.
So, Rhonda, you know, today is really all about the constitutionality of this case, right? But at the very beginning, the impeachment managers started with that powerful video, that montage of footage that took us through the timeline. That wasn't about, you know, historic facts from 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It was about that narrative, that experience that America went through just 1 month ago.
That's right, and that really was a part of setting the whole tone. That is their core message. This whole impeachment trial is that Donald Trump's words led to the insurrection directly. It's not anything that just happened or freedom of speech. It is something that he did prior to January 6th and on the 6th that led to the events. And they showed a lot of violent material. We even saw the video of one of the plainclothes officers shoot one of the Trump supporters who ended up dying from her wound. We saw that happen, and I think that was what the impeachment managers did today to design this as we're starting out, coming out of the gate, wanting to make you relive this experience, wanting you to see how devastating it was to go through it. You're right, it did not just last a few seconds or just a few videos. It really did a whole timeline of the entire day.
And James, a couple of elements that were sort of brought, you know, to the fore in that video montage and that timeline were, you know, the repeated anger and disgusting language used against police officers, the hostility and attacks on police officers, which is something that, you know, a lot of Republicans say they defend, you know, defend police and defend police lives. And something else that you saw, you know, repeatedly in that video was that President Trump speaking and the timeline of what was happening in that moment. What was the message here that Democrats were trying to show?
The message that Democrats were trying to show, Libby, is that this happened because of the president. And this trial is playing out at the scene of the crime. We remember the pictures of the so-called QAnon shaman standing in the presiding officer's chair. And the video, I think pretty persuasively, when tied together, showed how Trump's comments directly followed, Trump's comments directly preceded the crowd moving toward the Capitol. And you even saw snippets of people saying, Trump says to go toward the Capitol. You know, Trump sent us. And you're absolutely right to point out the law enforcement element of that, including Trump supporters, members of the mob yelling, you know, your boss told us to come here, as they breached the Capitol. And also what we heard from Trump, and it was a good reminder because even though it's been a month, the memories can be a little hazy of just how visceral this was. And obviously everyone who's sitting there was there that day. But the fact that Trump said, I'm going with you to the Capitol, let's go to the Capitol after this speech. You've got to send them a message that Trump said 3 different times. I'll be there with you, right alongside you. And I think that is a powerful indictment of the president, of the former president, because it shows that he really was urging the people who were in this crowd to become a mob and to go to the Capitol.
Well, you know, we heard from James a little while ago that one of the arguments that impeachment manager Jamie Raskin made was that January is not a free-for-all, is not a free time for presidents. So let's listen to the impeachment manager, Congressman Raskin, arguing that Trump's oath of office did not expire when he lost the election, and he called it a January exception. He said that exception to the Constitution would be an invitation to impunity. Let's watch.
Conduct that would be a high crime and misdemeanor in your first year as president, and your second year as president, and your third year as president, and for the vast majority of your fourth year as president, you can suddenly do in your last few weeks in office without facing any constitutional accountability at all. This would create a brand new January exception to the Constitution of the United States of America. A January exception. And everyone can see immediately why this is so dangerous. It's an invitation to the president to take his best shot at anything he may want to do on his way out the door, including using violent means to lock that door, to hang on to the Oval Office at all costs, and to block the peaceful transfer of power. In other words, the January exception is an invitation to our founders' worst nightmare.
Let's go to James Homan. You know, James, other impeachment managers, I'm thinking of Congressman Swalwell, have pointed out that if you have this January exception, then a president has no reason to let go of power. I mean, the time you stage a coup or the time that you try to retain power is when you're about to lose it, right? So not only is that January lame duck time period, you know, still part of your presidency, it could be an especially vulnerable one to the president as well as to the United States because it is a transitional moment.
Absolutely, Libby. And that graphic that Congressman Raskin showed, I think, visualized that well. And that is the most fragile time, that transition between presidents. And that is what sets the United States apart. That's why it was so significant in 1796 when George Washington, like Cincinnatus, handed over power peacefully to his successor, gave up power. That is kind of the secret of our sauce. And if you took away the only way to punish a sitting president off the table for some period of time, then it does remove disincentives. And that's, you know, I think the overwhelming body of evidence based on the founders, based on precedent, shows that clearly it wasn't intended that you couldn't have a trial for someone who got impeached while they were still president. And that it's important to remember what today is really about, which is this is about trying to give Republicans an out, identifying a supposed technicality, a supposed loophole, so that they can make a process argument for opposing Trump's impeachment, rather than having to condone or to condemn the comments that led allegedly to the horrific conduct that we saw in that video.
Rhonda Colvin, set us up for the rest of the day here. So we've seen the impeachment managers make their case. What happens next, and what will you be listening for?
Well, up next, we will hear from Trump's lawyers. His defense team will lay out the reasons they think this is unconstitutional, and that's really been at the core of their entire argument for these proceedings, that this is not constitutional, that you cannot impeach a president after he is already gone. So we're going to hear from them, lay out that case. They will probably mention that he was speaking under free speech and that his actions did not lead to what happened on January 6th. So they have up to 4 hours to do that argument. I am not sure if they're going to take the full 4 hours. The House impeachment managers did not take up their full time. So we will just wait to see what they have to say, what is their argument, what visuals they might be bringing to the floor, and how they're just going to present their first time here on the Senate floor.
So, Rhonda, you know, each side is allotted a certain amount of time, but that doesn't mean that they have to use all of that time, right? The goal here is to make a persuasive argument, not to run out the clock, unlike sometimes in the Senate when it really is all about running out the clock. So let's talk about today, moving into the arc of the rest of the week.
So after the Trump's defense team finishes up their arguments, the Senate will take a vote tonight and decide on the constitutionality of these proceedings. So if that passes, it only needs to have a simple majority, not 2/3 of the Senate. So if it passes, it's likely to. They will go ahead and resume the rest of the trial tomorrow, where you will see the opening arguments from both sides, the impeachment managers as well as Trump's defense team. So we will likely see more visual aids, more videos from the House team. And as I just said a little bit ago, that the Trump team will be going after the idea of the former president being protected under free speech. Now, after they end up their arguments in the actual trial, we're going to go ahead and move to a vote on whether or not to allow witnesses to be subpoenaed and testify in this trial. So that will happen later on this week, and depending where that goes, we'll know how long the trial will be. And then, of course, after that, you'll have closing arguments on one day, and then you will have the vote whether or not to acquit or convict Donald Trump.
James, what will you be listening for in the arguments laid out by Trump's lawyers today as sort of an indicator of what their broader argument will be?
Yeah, Libby, and it's important to remember, these guys got on the case late in the game. They replaced the South Carolina lawyers who didn't want to argue that the election was fraudulent and that Trump somehow won. These lawyers do not have a relationship with Donald Trump. And in fact, at least one of them has never even met Trump. So it will be interesting to see whether they engage with the substance of what Jamie Raskin was saying. I think that obviously you're right. It's not about running down the clock in this situation. It's about making an actual argument. Are they going to entirely focus on the process argument, the constitutionality argument, or are they going to actually sort of essentially make an opening statement to respond substantively to the Democratic charge? That video, which I think is so far the most memorable moment of the day, the video is about the substance of the allegations against Trump, not about the thing that they're getting 2 hours to debate. And so it will be interesting to see if they actually respond to those underlying charges, and as Rhonda was talking about, make the First Amendment argument that Trump was well within his rights to say what he said, or whether they just entirely focus on trying to give a procedural out to Senate Republicans. Because ultimately, it's important to remind the audience, everyone knows right now they have the votes to win. All they need to do, the president's defense team, is convince 34 of the 50 Republican senators to vote not to convict Trump, and they currently have those votes. So they just need to be able to keep those 34 comfortable and not let anyone be dissuaded. And so I think they're going to try to play it pretty straight, just because ultimately they know that this is a hard case for them not to win.
Yeah, they go into it with that advantage of knowing that a lot of Republicans have no appetite to convict President Trump. James, what do we know about President Trump's appetite for this whole thing? Last year we had the insights of his Twitter feed, and so we saw sort of the subliminal and sometimes shocking just feed from the President of the United States reacting to his own impeachment trial. It's a very different experience this year.
It is. And when you talk to a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill, they say, we wish Twitter had banned Trump privately, 4 years ago. And there is some irony. Neera Tanden, President Biden's nominee for the Office of Management and Budget, had her confirmation hearing this morning, and it essentially consisted of Republicans asking her about mean things she's tweeted about Senate Republicans, and so we're not getting that insight, I guess is the word, into what Trump is thinking. But we do know, these are obviously his lawyers. Jason Miller, a longtime strategist for him, a former Ted Cruz strategist back in 2016, has been tweeting and pretty aggressively attacking the proceedings. Yesterday was publicly attacking Chuck Cooper, the Republican power lawyer, who said that it's totally constitutional to try a former president. So I expect we're going to hear from Trump allies, but it certainly is a different dynamic without the president live tweeting. I can guarantee you, though, that Donald Trump is watching these proceedings.
Rhonda, one thing that senators have to do this week is just listen, and it's an unusual position for them to be in a lot of ways, because they're often used to being sort of at the microphone in the center of attention. But their job right now is to listen. We heard the very, beginning, the opening about, upon pain of imprisonment, you need to be there and listening. But what does their role really look like right now?
And that's an important point to point out, that this is not a typical proceeding for the Senate. In fact, many senators, and unless there's a vote on the chamber floor, they usually aren't in there. But in an impeachment trial, they all have to be a captive audience. They all, per the Constitution, have to sit there and listen throughout the entirety of the trial. And even breaks, those have to be agreed upon. The leader, we just saw Majority Leader Schumer say that he would call a 10-minute break. But other than that, they aren't allowed to get up and walk around or talk or even have their cell phones in front of them. In fact, they're not able to read anything that has anything outside of the impeachment, to do with outside of the impeachment. So their whole attention has to be on these proceedings. And that's something, too, that a lot of folks on the Hill have been talking about, the timing of this trial, because they're also trying to keep momentum up for Biden's agenda. But when you have an impeachment trial, you have to pause everything. Everything must start at the 1 o'clock hour on the first day of the trial, which was today. And then throughout the week, they'll start at different times and end at different times. But they all have to be focused on the impeachment right now. So even when they have their Q&A session, where after the arguments by both sides are made, senators will have about 4 hours to ask questions. They're not able to get up and talk. They have to actually write down their questions on a piece of paper and have that be read for them. And multiple, I think we're going to go back to the Senate floor right now.
All right, thanks so much, Rhonda. And we are listening for the one presiding over the Senate, Senator Leahy, there to resume day one. Let's go now to hear what Trump's lawyers have to say.
Mr. President and members of the United States Senate, thank you for taking the time to hear from me. My name is Bruce Castor. I am the lead counsel for the 45th President of the United States. I was an assistant DA for such a long time, I keep saying prosecutor, but I do understand the difference, Mr. Reskin. Before I begin, I want to comment on the outstanding presentation from our opponents and the emotion that certainly welled up in Congressman Raskin about his family being here during that terrible day. And you will not hear any member of the team representing former President Trump say anything but in the strongest possible way denounce the violence of the rioters and those that breached the Capitol, the very citadel of our democracy, literally the symbol that flashes on television whenever you're trying to explain that we're talking about the United States. Instant symbol. To have it attacked is repugnant in every sense of the word. The loss of life is horrific. I spent many long years prosecuting homicide cases, catching criminals that committed murders. I have quite an extensive experience in dealing with the aftermath of those things. Certainly, as a FOP member and a member of many police organizations myself, we mourn the loss of the Capitol Police officer, who I understand is laying not too far away from here. And you know, many of you in this room, over your careers before they reached this summit here in the Senate, would have had times where you represented your local communities as assistant district attorneys, assistant Commonwealth attorneys, assistant state attorneys. And you know this to be true, that when a horrific event occurred in your county or in your jurisdiction, if it was a state jurisdiction, you know that there was a terrible outcry, and the public immediately reacts with a desire that someone pay because something really bad happened. And that is a natural reaction of human beings. It's a natural reaction of human beings because we are generally a social people. We enjoy being around one another, even in D.C. We recognize that people all the world over, and especially Americans who share that special bond with one another, love the freedoms that this country gives us. And we all feel that if somebody is unsafe when they're walking down the street, that the next person that's unsafe could be you, your spouse, one of your children, some other person that you love and know personally. So you'll never hear anybody representing former President Trump say anything at all other than what happened on January 6th and the storming and breaching of the Capitol should be denounced in the most vigorous terms, nor that those persons responsible should be prosecuted to the fullest extent that our laws allow. And indeed, I have followed some of those cases and those prosecutions, and it seems to me that we're doing a pretty good job of identifying and prosecuting those persons who committed those offenses. And I commend the FBI and the District of Columbia Police and the other agencies for their work. It's natural to recoil. It's an immediate thing. It comes over you without your ability to stop it. The desire for retribution. Who caused this awful thing? How do we make them pay? We recognize in the law, and I know many of you are lawyers, probably lawyers, some of you, I've been a lawyer 35 years, longer than me. Many longer than me, probably. And we know we have a specific body of law that deals with passion and rage, blinding logic and reason. That's the difference between manslaughter and murder. Manslaughter is the killing of a human being upon sudden and intense provocation. But murder is done with cold blood and reflective thought. We are so understanding of the concept that people's minds can be overpowered with emotion where logic does not immediately kick in, that we have recognized examples that otherwise would be hearsay and said that no, when you're driving down the street and you look over at your wife and you say, hey, you know what, that guy's about to drive through the red light and kill that person, your wife can testify to what you said, because even though it's technically hearsay, is an exception because it's the event living through the person. Why? No opportunity for reflective thought. And there's all sorts of examples that we recognize in the law for why people immediately desire retribution, immediately recognize in the law that people can be overcome by events. And you know, senators of the United States, they're not ordinary people. They're extraordinary people, in the technical sense, extraordinary people. When I was growing up in suburban Philadelphia, my parents were big fans of Senator Everett Dirksen from Illinois. And Senator Dirksen recorded a series of lectures that my parents had on a record. And we still know what records are, right? On the thing you put the needle down on and you play it. And here's little Bruce, 8, 9, 10 years old, listening to this back in the late 60s. And I would be listening to that voice. If you ever heard Everett Dirksen's voice, it's the most commanding, gravelly voice that just oozes belief and sincerity. Must have been a phenomenal United States senator. He doesn't talk about ordinary people as we do in the law. We apply the ordinary person standard. He talks about extraordinary people. He talks about gallant men, is the name of the album. And now, of course, in the sign of the times, gallant men and women. And I would watch television, and I would watch Senator Goldwater or Senator Byrd or Senator Mansfield, Senator Dole, And I would be fascinated by these great men. And everybody's parents say this when they're growing up. You could grow up to be a United States Senator. You could do that. They're just men and women like you are. Well, then Everett Dirksen tells us that they're not. They're gallant men and women that do extraordinary things when their country needs them to do it. United States senators really are different. And I have been around United States senators before. Two of them in this room from Pennsylvania, I like to think, are friendly toward me, or at least friends of mine when we're not politically adverse. And I have been around their predecessors. And one thing I have discovered, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, United States senators are patriots first. Patriots first. They love their country. They love their families. They love the states that they represent. There isn't a member in this room who has not used the term, I represent the great state of fill in the blank. Why? Because they're all great? Yeah. But you think yours is greater than others because these are your people. These are the people that sent you here to do their work. They trusted you with the responsibility of representative government. You know, I feel proud to know my senators, Senator Casey up here in the back, Senator Toomey over to the left. You know, it's funny, this is an aside, but it's funny. You ever notice how when you're talking or you hear others talking about you when you're home in your state, they will say, you know, I talked to my senator, or I talked to somebody on the staff of my senator. It's always my senator. Why is it that we say my senator? We say that because the people you represent are proud of their senators. They absolutely feel that connection of pride because that's not just Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. That's my senator from Pennsylvania. Or Bob Casey from Scranton. That's my senator. And you like that. People like that. The people back home really do. And United States senators have a reputation, and it's deserved. They have a reputation for cool-headedness, being erudite. The men and women that we send from back home to D.C. to look after our interests. We feel a sense of ownership and a sense of pride in our senators. There's plenty of times I've been around in political gatherings where I hear, there's no way Senator Toomey's going to allow that. I don't mean to pick on you, Pat, but there's no way Senator Casey is going to allow that. Because we feel pride and something bad is potentially in the wind. And we expect our United States senators not reacting to popular will and not reacting to popular emotions. We expect them to do what is right, notwithstanding what is immediately and expedient that the media tells us is the topic of the day. So senators are patriots. Senators are family men and women. They're fierce advocates for the great state in which they represent. And somewhere far down that list of attributes, way below patriot, and way below love of family and country, and way below fierce advocates for their states, far down, at least that's what I thought, anyway, and I still think that, somewhere far down that list, senators have some obligation to be partisans, to represent a group of beliefs that are similar to beliefs shared by other United States senators. I understand that. And in fact, I have no problem with that system. It helps us debate and decide what is best for America, the robust debate of different points of view. And I dare say that Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell represent those things in this body and make sure that everything is talked out and robustly debated in this room before United States senators make a decision of extreme importance to the people they represent. I know you aren't allowed to talk, but I don't see either one of them jumping up and saying I'm wrong about that, because I think that that's what happens. I think United States senators try to listen to each other's views. I think United States senators try to do what is right for the country. And far down is partisanship. In our system of government, and if you read the Federalist Papers, we're very fortunate because the Federalist Papers were authored as an explanation for why it is the states, the original states, should adopt the Constitution. These were persuasive documents about why the Constitution is a good thing. Because if the individual state legislatures didn't adopt the Constitution, we would not have it. So Mr. Jay and Mr. Madison and Mr. Hamilton, they had an incentive to explain what they were thinking when they wrote it, because they are explaining to other erudite people who represent individual states why it is that they feel that this is the right thing to do. And in fact, as many of you well know,